Hey yo, good afternoon, viewers of the tube. My name is Tyler of Chico Crypto, and welcome to the channel that is riding this Bitcoin wave up, down, and all around, and hoping to be a helping hand for any novice surfers looking to test those waters. Well, surf's up, brah, cause it's time for Chico Crypto. Today, I would like to talk about the state of our global economy. The global economic crisis of 2008 was a wake-up call to how monetary policies were being run across the globe. Cheap credit made it too easy for people to buy houses or make other investments that were based on speculations. The people of the United States with the cheap credit were buying a bunch of houses, taking out loans larger than they could afford because mortgage brokers were making a killing off giving out the loans. Those mortgage brokers would then package these bad mortgages with other mortgages and resell them as investments. Banks and investment firms' portfolios were made up of these mortgage-backed securities. And when the ticking time bomb went off, the house of cards came falling down. Individuals and investors could no longer flip their homes for a quick profit. Adjustable rate mortgages adjusted skyward, and mortgages were no longer affordable. Hundreds and thousands of these mortgages defaulted, leaving the investors and financial institutions holding the bags. This caused massive losses in mortgage-backed securities, and many banks and investment firms began bleeding money. The mass losses caused banks to tighten their lending requirements, but it was already too late. The damage was done, and many of these banks and financial institutions merged with others, or they were bought out. Others received a government bailout to still function, while the worst of the lot crashed and disappeared. So what do you think was the answer to this? To give out more cheap credit, of course. Cheap credit got the world into the mess, so countries across the globe used the policy of lowering interest rates. After the crisis, many central banks reduced policy interest rates to zero to boost economic growth. Over 10 years later, those interest rates remain suspiciously low in most countries. As we can see from this chart, most countries are sitting at below 2% interest rate, with many sitting in the negative. Only 3 countries, Iceland, Mexico, and Turkey, are 4% or above. Now, historically, severe recessions require 3 to 6% point cuts in policy interest rates. And if another crisis is to happen, only Iceland, Mexico, and Turkey would have that kind of room for their monetary policy to respond. A super majority of countries across the globe have no room to maneuver and are being backed into a corner. With the decades of low interest rates, the economy does look good on paper. Here in the US, household wealth has ballooned by over $50 trillion since the economic downturn, as seen from this chart. While most people welcome and applaud a wealth boom like this, it actually might be a dangerous bubble that will be similar to what happened in 2008, or worse. Let's switch to this chart with household wealth, the blue line, with the underlying economy, or GDP, the orange line. In sustainable organic wealth booms, household wealth tracks GDP very closely. Starting in the late 1990s, household wealth decoupled from GDP as the tech stock bubble helped inflate portfolios, until it came crashing down in the early 2000s. In the mid-2000s, the US housing bubble once again decoupled household wealth from GDP, with a larger gap, until the crash happened and the gap closed. Here we are in 2019, and that gap has widened to the furthest in the history of the US economy. This is the everything bubble because a wide range of assets and markets are involved in this bubble. After the housing crash and the Great Recession, the Fed was so desperate to create an economic recovery and bull market that it did so via the brute force of monetary policy. Like those low interest rates we just talked about. By cutting interest rates to record low levels and pumping trillions of dollars worth of liquidity into the financial system, the Fed has succeeded in creating an asset boom that has caused the S&P 500 to soar by over 300%. The Fed's historical interest rates show how periods of low interest rates have led to inflation bubbles, slashing right before the dot-com bubble, then extreme slashing right before the housing bubble. This everything bubble of the past decade is dangerous and extreme because interest rates have never been at such low levels for such a long period of time. In addition to lowering the interest rates, the Fed utilized quantitative easing for the very first time. This entails creating new money digitally for the purpose of buying bonds and other assets, which helps pump more liquidity into the financial system. This chart shows the total holdings of the Federal Reserve as it embarked on its 3 easing programs, each of which led to surges in the stock market. Household wealth has ballooned, but in the Fed's quarterly flow of funds report, the Fed said household net wealth fell from a peak of $108 trillion to $104.3 trillion in the final months of 2018. This was a 3.5% drop and the biggest quarterly loss since late 2008. Wealth has started to fall, but debt among households has grown to levels not seen since 2008, even outgrowing 2008 by nearly $2 trillion. The crisis is coming. Recessions and economic downturns are a natural force, and the powers that be, they actually know this. What can be done to keep the gravy train flowing? In February of this year, the IMF put out a blog post titled, "Cashing In: How to Make Negative Interest Rates Work." The blog post is basically a hit piece on cash money. It explains in a cashless world, there would be no lower bound on interest rates. A central bank could reduce the interest rates from 2% to -4% to counter a severe recession. This interest rate cut would transmit to bank deposits, loans, and bonds. Without cash, depositors of banks would have to pay the negative interest rate to keep their money with that bank, making consumption and investment more attractive than holding their e-money with a bank. Basically, the idea is to encourage people to never have a savings. They want to encourage regular people to always spend their money, to always consume, and to never save. The only type of savings would be investments in things like real estate, but the majority of people will not even be able to invest in homes in the future. Only the wealthy would be able to increase their wealth, while the poor would be at the mercy of the banks. Either spend or pay the bank for the luxury of holding onto their e-money credits. This is downright scary, and it makes me depressed just thinking about it. The article from the IMF is just the beginning. The war on cash and savings is going to heat up in the coming years. But as we know, there is something called Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Bitcoin essentially turns you into your own bank. You control your wealth, and there is no way they can charge you a fee for holding on to this type of e-money. Bitcoin represents a decentralized response to the financial regulations that Satoshi Nakamoto saw coming. Rather than being controlled by external national entities, Bitcoin provides a method of capital transfer that functions in response to market forces. Through the distributed ledger, the problems that led to the current state of financial fear are now removed, allowing for the free flow of value between parties. It's no wonder Satoshi Nakamoto tagged the Bitcoin Genesis block with The Times, 03 January 2009, Chancellor on the brink of a second bailout for banks. The handwriting for the next crisis was already written on the wall, and Satoshi knew it. Cheers, viewers. I'll see you next time.